David Hopman is a professor at the UTA and has a book coming out, which way back in the beginning, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to get autographed editions of it. But here we are online, and the book is not quite in print yet. But he's going to tell us a little bit, talk about, I don't know, thought what's something in that he is written about is going to be a chapter in his book or something. So he's very strict. He's really into native plants, native to the region, not native to Texas in general, but planting native plants that are regionalized, native to where we live. So I like, and landscaping it attractively, not just making a pretty pan. I was just reading about how the whole landscaping industry has changed, where before they never thought about insects and bugs and what was habitable. They just always planted whatever looked nice. So anyway, I'd like to hear from you. So it's your turn. Go ahead, David.
Okay, well, thank you, Jim. And I appreciate your help getting this organized and all the emails and all that kind of stuff. And I appreciate it, everybody who was involved in pulling this together. I'm going to be talking about ecology a little bit. I'm going to be talking about native plants, which I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I still feel like it needs to be said. And then I'm going to explain about native urban polycultures, which is something that I really got started working on when I was a research associate at BRIT back around 2014, 2015. And I've come to realize, the more I have worked with them and the more I think about it, that it really is not possible to do planting design, especially ornamental planting design, with native plants, actual native plants, without intermingling them, because our plants tend to be ephemeral, right? We have countercyclical plants that are dormant in the summer and green in the winter. We have plants that are only green in the spring, and then they go dormant in the summer, and then they come back in the fall. We have, there's so many different ways that our native plants are ephemeral, that if we try to put them into monocultures, into just one species in one place, it's just not going to work. And I've been thinking about this a long time, and I really think that that's the original sin of gardening, is to try to do a monoculture. Once you have made the decision to use a monoculture, then you open yourself up to the plants that look good all year, which are almost by definition exotic plants that the plant industry has created to do that, and they certainly exist. There's lots and lots of them. So the two really go together. If you're interested in native plants, you need to be interested in intermingled combinations of plants. So that's really what I'm talking about. And I do have my book is a book on design theory, and it's called Creative Regional Design, Renewing the Aesthetics of Landscape in Environmental Design and Planning. So it's a big sprawling book, 300 pages long. But I do have a chapter that really focuses on this as I have one chapter on plants. There's 9 chapters, one chapter on plants. The rest of it is about all kinds of other issues related to design. Okay, so I'm going to get rolling. Obviously, as a landscape architect, I'm interested in aesthetics, and what I mean by aesthetics is the experience of the place, really. And the native plants, they do bring the poetics of the local biomes into metropolitan areas, something I'm passionate about, and you'll see lots of pictures of that in this talk. I'm interested in environmental issues. When I separate environment from ecology, environment to me is more about chemistry, phytoremediation, using plants to clean water and air, saving water use, sequestering carbon, not using horrible chemicals, all that. To me, that's all environmental stuff, but there are certainly plenty of exotic plants that can do that just as well. What exotic plants can't do is ecology. So that's why I call ecology an even more inconvenient truth, because once you start considering ecology important, then it changes the whole way that you think about gardening and you think about plants. It really is a fundamental break in your kind of attitude towards gardening. And this is a pretty good little, okay, so ecology, the Carey Institute says it's the study of the processes influencing the distribution and abundance of organisms, the interactions among those organisms, and the interactions between the organisms and the transformation and flux of energy and matter. So it's not just the fauna and the flora, but it's also the way they interact with the air, with water, with soil, with minerals, all that kind of things. And we know that we're having a real problem, right? I mean, this is not anything new to everybody, that we're entering, or I would say that we're in our 6th mass extinction. And as the population, you can see how the population is just growing exponentially. We call these, these hockey curves. The extinction rate is currently about 1,000 times what it was before the Industrial Revolution. So in the last 250 years, it's multiplied by 1,000. And that's all documented. And the projection is that in the next 100 years, 50% of all vertebrate species will go extinct. And right now, about 80% of all the life forms on the planet have never even been documented. We don't even know what's on, and I'm talking about, I mean, most of those are bacteria and nematode worms and things like that. But still, there are still, like, somebody discovered a plant, right? That plant, maybe it'll turn out to be something wonderful. So we're destroying all of these life forms before we've even had a chance to experience them or to learn about them. I'm a big fan of Edward Wilson, who I actually saw speak, I don't know when it was, 7 or 8 years ago at, no, it couldn't have been that long. Yeah, I guess it could have, at Brit. Some of you may have seen him at Brit. Wonderful speaker.
I want to try it.
He's written lots of books, and he has this thing called HIPPO or CHIPPO, which is an acronym talking about what we're doing to the fauna. Habitat destruction, invasive species, pollution, and climate change are 4 things that polycultures can actually address. And I wish I had time to go into it, but I don't really. And of course, with global warming and the climate crisis, we have these biota that are moving, that we know they're going to be moving through the metroplex. So, I as a landscape architect, I want to take responsibility for trying to bring some ecology into heavily developed areas, not just putting the ecology out in the countryside and then having these large kill zones. The DFW is about the same size as the state of Massachusetts, just having this, and then you have another one in Austin, San Antonio, you have another one in Houston, and you can see in this kind of a population heat map, where the population centers are. Here's DFW, here's Austin, and here's Houston. And, since 1980, the population of Texas has basically doubled to almost 30 million between 1980 and 2020. And California, it's gone from 23.5 million to over 39 million, California. So it's happening all over the United States. There are places like in West Texas and, in the Intermountain West where it's actually emptying out, which is because, there's just not a lot of resources there, either physical or financial or any other way. But so bringing ecology into urban areas is one thing I'm really interested in. So ecology is about birds, bees, and butterflies, but it's not just about birds, bees, and butterflies. And I think sometimes we put an overemphasis on just a few of the biota that they don't have to be charismatic megafauna. They can be charismatic microfauna. I love birds. I love cedar waxwings. I'm going to talk about them, and anoles, and the pollinators, and the swallowtails, and all that kind of stuff. But it's much more complicated than that. And we sometimes we don't use the common wisdom that we already have. So like when we go to a national park, we see these signs and we know that feeding the animals does all kinds of crazy things to the ecology, right? It makes them dependent on us, and then we leave, and then they die, and it makes them unhealthy. And we just sort of know from lots of educational things like this that that feeding animals is not always the best thing for them. And I'm using this example of the tropical milkweed because I don't think I've seen a monarch way station or a butterfly garden in the Metroplex without this plant. And this is an exotic plant. It's not native anywhere in the United States. And yet the monarchs love it. Yes, it attracts monarchs. And it also is it attracts larvae, it attracts all kinds of things. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. But here you can see Biota of North America project. I know most of you are familiar with this, but I never use a plant for a project without looking it up first. And you can see that this color means that it is present in these states, but that it's exotic. It's not native anywhere in the United States. It's typically sold as a native plant, and there are people who vehemently say it is a native plant, but it's not. It has consequences. It turns out that because it blooms so long, our native milkweeds, they just bloom for a month or two, and then depending on the species and different times of the year, and then the bloom goes away or the plant dies down in the summer, and then the monarchs move on. But this thing just keeps going and going and going, and the monarchs think they think, hey, this is great, and they just don't leave, and it becomes a vector for diseases that have been traced to the monarchs just sticking around too long. And it also sometimes they stick around so long that they get stuck in this weather like we're having right now. They don't move south because this plant is just so attractive to them. So that's a sort of an unintended consequence of something that seems like it's doing something good. But it's not a native plant. So it doesn't have all of the complex biotic interactions kind of built in. So again, I know you guys know all this, but I think we all need to be reminded, including me. So I love cedar waxwings. Cedar waxwings are killed by I don't know how many, but millions probably, by eating the wrong kinds of berries. And so things like Nandina berries, Burford holly berries. I've seen cedar waxwings gorge on Burford holly berries and then keel over dead. So it's not necessarily the chemicals, although it can be, but sometimes it's just that physically gets stuck in their gut and they can't digest it. The spread of all of these invasive plants and exotic plants, it hurts a lot of birds. So don't feed the wildlife, even though if the wildlife like it. I guess that's my first admonition. Be careful. And by the way, I took these pictures about 4 weeks ago of the cedar waxwings in my front yard. So I really invite anybody who likes a challenge in photography to try to take a picture of those little buggers, because they never stand still for 1 second. They're little tiny and they're always way up in the trees, and they're nervous. You can't get too close. So you have to get them at just the right time of day and have the right equipment. And but I thought this turned out pretty good. So you can get them in action like that. So they really are beautiful. I mean, even if they do poop all over your yard, right? Sometimes that's a little obnoxious, but they were really around this year. Everybody noticed them because I guess because of the weather we've been having, but they didn't fly through earlier in the fall. They kind of stuck around. So these exotic plants like Nandinas with berries, if you have some in your yard, just get rid of them. When I moved into my house, I had a Burford holly tree, I don't know, 20 feet tall, gigantic thing. I had it removed, so I'm trying to be an exemplar and also just do the right thing. I don't feel good about these native birds eating these seeds and dying, So anyway, so this kind of leads us to something called the ecological paradox, which is, hold on 1 second, I need to minimize this thing. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. It was, there we go. the more we isolate ourselves from the ecosystem services created by biodiversity, the more we endanger our own existence, our own long-term survival. And so that, people have written books about this. So my position is that there are many unknown and perhaps unknowable biotic interactions in plants. And there is no way that we can study every plant for both positive and negative biotic interactions. And so there really is only one solution, and that is to plant natives. So I appreciate everything that you guys are doing. Okay, so this is kind of where we are, right? We're with the contemporary and native adapted plant palette, where we have kind of a United Nations of plants. They're from Central America, they're from Texas, they're from Cuba, they're designed by a committee, they're from the Middle East, they're from China, and they're very good for the environment in terms of, saving water and things like that, but they're not so good for ecology. And so the same thing's happening with landscape architects. I don't know of a landscape architect who's using native plants. I've sent out a call for, is anybody in the United States doing this kind of thing, using intermingled plants with actual native plants? So far, nobody has responded. I'm sure there's somebody out there. I have not met anybody yet that does. And so this is Carpenter Park, which just went in Dallas. I went there with my class in November 22, and it looks kind of native-y, and it kind of looks like a polyculture. I mean, it could be a polyculture, but if you actually look at the species that are in the garden, there are only 6 native plants in the entire, and they have the whole number. There's a number of gardens there, but in these 3 gardens, there's only 6 native plants. The ones that are in red are exotic. The ones that are in yellow are either near natives or nativars. And we're gonna talk about that, about what a nativar is and the problem with that. A nativar is basically a selection, or it's usually a selection. So there's a plant that happened to grow be white instead of red, or red instead of blue, or it was taller, or it was smaller, had some kind of different morphology, or it's been bred that way to have a longer growing flowering season, or whatever it is. They're bred for all different kinds of things. Good for the environment, mostly, not so great for ecology, which I'll explain. And it's getting to the point where you almost can't buy native plants anymore. It's very hard to find native plants. So one of the ways you can tell if something's a native plant is if it only has 2 names and not 3. Yes, there are native plants that are varieties, actual native varieties, but most native plants that are sold, if they have 3 names, it means that they have changed in some way from the one that we typically find in our area. So, when I was learning to be a landscape architect, I learned to look for 3 names, that somehow made you more sophisticated. Salvia, Farinaceae, Victoria. Yes, well, I know my salvias, and that's my favorite one. Never mind the fact that Victoria is Victoria, Texas, which is a long way from here, and it's a different color than the actual native, and all that kind of stuff. So I strongly urge everybody to ask for and to try to find species instead of all these selections. White Turk's caps, or pink Turk's caps, or on and on and on. And of course, with the National Corporate Plant Palette, Monrovia, all the kind of things they sell at Home Depot, everything has 3 names: Camellia sasanqua, Northern Exposure, Mahonia, X Media. Of course, that's hybridized. But they don't sell a plant that doesn't have 3 names, because these plants, a lot of them are patented, and they can come up with some new concoction and patent it. So I'm going to show you just a really brief, very, very short video that was done by Annie White, who is a plant researcher. And we've got here New England aster, which is, you can see it has two names, Symphyotrichum novae angliae. So that is the species. And this one looks almost exactly the same, morphologically, right? And New England aster Symphyotrichum novae angliae alma pachki. So what she did is she went through a whole series of plants, echinaceas and asters and this whole bunch of different plants. She looked at the species, she looked at ones that were just slightly different, and then she went all the way to the ones that were really tarted up, with different morphology and color. So here, I hope you can see the video. I know it doesn't always come across, but this is the nativar. Instead of calling it a cultivar, they call it a nativar. This is the Alma pachki. This is the one that's not native. And she's looking for pollinators. She's actually counting in 5 minutes how many pollinators can she find in a given area. It's probably a square meter or something. And she found 5 pollinators in 5 minutes on this one called Alma pachki. So, there's a few. You can see there's a bee right here. It's not that there's none. But then here's the actual native one, same time, same place, right next to it. And you can see it has over 10 times as many pollinators. So it has 50 per 5 minutes instead of 5. And you know that if you have native plants, even if the flowers are inconspicuous, they just become a riot of pollinators. So this is one reason, aside from the harm that they can do, that the nativars can do, you're also missing out on the good that the actual natives can do. So this is a pep talk to see if you can use the species, because I know there's so many people pushing you the other way. So Annie White and I did a ASLA, American Society of Landscape Architects webinar together. And so she's really wonderful. She's up in New England and Vermont. And you can see that the bumblebees, with the native one, it was way up here. With the nativar, it was down here. Honeybees, which of course are not native, but way up here and the way down here. Other native bees, much higher, flies, butterflies, moths, all the different kinds of pollinators that she kept track of. And what she found was, this is a plant everybody can relate to, this is the echinacea, right? And by the way, the Echinacea purpurea is not native here. That's usually the only one you can buy. It's Echinacea angustifolia that's native here. It's similar, but it's not the same. So the best ones were the ones that were just pure native. This one, you can see it's double, but it's still the same color. So it's kind of okay. This one where you're double and you change the color, now it starts to become problematic. And then this one is so morphologically different that the pollinators sometimes can't even find it. Bees can't see the color red. A lot of pollinators can't see the color red. And they can see way over into the ultraviolet spectrum, which we can't. What we might consider attractive to them might be look like a leaf or just be invisible. So they see all completely different wavelengths. So what I'm leading up to here is some tough love, because before I came here today, I actually looked at your plant list, and some of you may know the plant list needs a little work, and I'm happy to help with that, by the way. But I looked, I don't want to go, we don't have time to go through the whole thing, but I looked at shrubs, I looked at small trees, and it turns out that this is shrubs. These shrubs right here are exotic. This is exotic, and these two are exotic. These two, the agarita is a near native. It's not a native, but it's a near native. And the red yucca is also a near native. Well, I don't know, you could call it a native. It's only been found in one county north of Dallas County, and I can't remember if it's Collin County, and it's only a couple of instances. So you could call that one native. I may be being a little picky about that. And then these are true natives. But when I say native, I'm actually kind of arbitrarily looking at things that are native to either Dallas or Tarrant County, because that's where most of the people live. If it's native, within a county or two, then I say, well, it's a near native. And then you can make your own decision. If it's a near native and it's in the same biome, maybe it's okay. But if it's just like 4 or 5 biomes away and hundreds of miles, 200, 300 miles away, then it really has nothing to do with our ecology, and that's why I'm calling these exotic. And the same thing with the trees. American smoke tree, the golden ball lead tree, lacy oak, Texas persimmon, and the acacia are just not native plants. And so again, I go to Bonap. So here's Salvia greggii. This is one that everybody plants, and it's really not native anywhere around here. We're way up here, and there's one little county, and I don't know exactly. This is probably Austin right here. So that's maybe 125 miles away, 150 miles away. It's in a different, very different biome. That's one that might raise a few hackles. There's your Hesperaloe. There's one little outlier that was found over here. This is Dallas County. This is Tarrant County. Just one little outlier. So it's sort of a native plant, but not really. Of course, Mahonia swayzii is not native at all. It's going way down here. And then the Quercus lacy oak the same way. So I'm encouraging everybody, even though I know it's difficult, but look for plants that are actually native to the biome, that you're growing in, and also ideally maybe the hardiness zone. They're going to have a much better relationship with all the biota in your area. And I'll be curious what your thoughts are about all that. Okay, so once you've made the decision that you're going to use actual native plants, then, like I said, the idea of polycultures becomes very attractive, because they mitigate a lot of the perceived problems with using native plants, and there are some problems. So I have this thing called aesthetically qualified native urban polycultures, and what I mean by aesthetically qualified is that the matrix plants, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, which is basically like a intermingled native ground cover. That's basically, think about a ground cover that's, it could be any height, but it could be 6 inches tall, it could be 2 feet tall. But instead of just using one plant for a ground cover, you're using 2 plants, 3 plants, 10 plants, however many you want, but they're unified by either form, line, scale, texture, color. There's something that holds them together visually, and we'll see some examples of that. And so again, native to me means plants that are historically indigenous, pre-European settlement to the biome of the polyculture. And we have 4 biomes basically in Tarrant County, we have, and they're all at the Fort Worth Nature Center, if you want to go check them out. And then polyculture means intermingled recombinant groupings. Recombinant, just a fancy word for recombining, groupings of plant species extracted from a single native biome. And the idea of a polyculture, I know you guys don't need to see this, but it's been around gardening forever. This is the Fort Worth Botanic Garden, and they have exotic lawn and they have exotic bulbs, but this is a sort of random collection of bulbs growing inside of a lawn, and that's an accepted thing, in gardening circles, or even just taking rain lilies and sticking them in with sedges. That's not seen as anything radical. We also have lots of lawns, including at the Nasher Sculpture Center, that are made from exotic plants. Like in their case, it's 4 or 5 different varieties of fescue. A lot of you are familiar with this habiturf, and it works reasonably well. It works better than any one of these native turf plants by themselves. They all have limitations. They either go dormant too easily, or they can't. They don't respond well to stress. Like buffalo grass, you look at it cross-eyed, it goes dormant, and then when it goes dormant, that's when all the weed species come in. Here is I just did a close-up view of this because this is one of my neighbors just about a block away from my house who did a lawn in habit turf. It looks really good. These little asters came in, these native asters, which I'm a huge fan of these. These things get, about 3 feet tall. But their habit turf lawn looks really good. It's the first one that's gone in the neighborhood. We also sometimes see, as landscape architects, we see perennials, intermingled perennial combinations on green roofs, and this is considered acceptable. These are obviously all exotic plants. These are sedums, and yet when I've worked with landscape architects on green roofs, because I know a lot about native plants on green roofs, they always break it back out into monocultures. So, you've got this plant, you got this plant, you got this plant. And I worked on this one, I worked on this one too. And this is a Starbucks right near North Park in North Dallas. And again, they just can't make that leap to polycultures, and that creates problems because plants go dormant and that kind of thing. We also know about this kind of polyculture where you do compost sitting. This is Crystal Canyon, where when I was for a time very active working on beautifying Crystal Canyon. That's my wife right there, Sonia, and they sprayed a lot of the compost seeding. They sprayed it right on top of mulch here, and then this is what it looked like a year later. It was pretty spectacular. Unfortunately, it wasn't maintained. And if you don't maintain this, it goes away. And also, so a polyculture is not a restoration mix. This is really a restoration mix, and it's wonderful, but it's designed for a very large area. It doesn't really work in these little patches that you have typically in urban areas. I always show people, books. This book right here is probably the one that you would want to look at if you're interested in learning about the aesthetics of intermingled plants. Udolph and Kingsbury do not advocate and do not use native plants, but you can learn sort of aesthetic principles that you can apply using native plants. So I strongly encourage everybody to get this book. It's a real classic. It's been out about 10 years, and it has different ideas for intermingled plant combinations from all over the world. And these people in Germany do it this way, and these people in the Netherlands do it this way, and these people in England do it this way, because there are tricks to making these kind of things look good. Okay, so there are lots of benefits of native polycultures. Polycultures provide reservoirs of beneficial fungi and bacteria. You have you have a big collection of rhizospheres, and that encourages all these soil biota. We know, we don't have time to get into it, but about the trophic levels and the food web, and it all starts with the sun, and then you have the bacteria, the primary degraders, and on and on and on, all the way up until you finally get to us. So that's encouraging that is all really important, and it makes the plants actually healthier. They're not fighting with each other for nutrients; they're actually helping each other get more. And the different species coexist because they avoid competition by avoiding different niches. And that could be because of where they are horizontally. Maybe some a place where it's a little wetter or a little drier or a little more sun or a little more shade. They tend to move around and find the place where they, that's the kind of the sweet spot. And, if you look at prairie plants, this is a very famous graphic. You can see some of the prairie plants have very tiny little roots. Some have very open roots. Some have very dense roots. Some have very long roots. And so you're also making much better use of the soil column, and these long roots also open up the soil so that water can get down into the soil column. So having these combinations of plants really is a plus. It doesn't hurt them horticulturally anyway. So really a lot of ecological benefits. They use resources more completely. They cover the ground better, so you don't have to worry about weeds coming in as much. If you're interested in birds, You're going to be interested in arthropods, Doug Tallamy and Rick Dark, that wonderful book that they did, just talking about all the thousands and thousands of arthropods that birds eat every day to, keep their young going and everything. And even things like carbon sequestration, oxygen production. There's so many things that happen when you have a dense, living mass of vegetation, as opposed to one plant that has to do it all, because different plants do different things. So it's all good when it comes to ecology. And then horticulturally, like I said, they sort themselves by wet, dry, sunshade. And this is an important concept if you're talking about polycultures, is that you're not drawing a plan and then saying, okay, this is the way it's going to look forever. You have a rough plan, but then the thing kind of takes on a life of its own. And then you're making a decision every year. Does it need another plant? Does it have too much of this one plant? Things like that. You're constantly making decisions, kind of tweaking it around the edges, but letting it take on a life of its own. It's kind of you're setting the trajectory for a synthetic urban ecology, basically. And obviously it's going to be more resilient because, plants are going to go dormant when there's extremes, and you guys know about all the extremes. I like to use these two examples. In 2014, we had 21 inches of rain, and in 2015, we had 62 inches of rain. There aren't many places in the country that swing that much. This is really important. When I first started doing polycultures, I really didn't, I had read about this, but I didn't realize how important it was. Rooterals, increasers, and stress tolerators. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. And then it mediates I don't want a plant that's a flash in the pan criticism. Many people don't like native plants because they look fantastic for 2 months or 3 months, and then they go away. And so it kind of mitigates that, which is a really good horticultural benefit. Let me take a quick sip here. So let's talk a little bit about the rooterals and the increasers and the stress tolerators. And if you really want to nerd out on it, if you're really interested, this is the kind of the standard book about this book, Plant Strategies, Vegetation Process, and Ecosystem Properties. And the big change here, and this is another fundamental change in the way people garden, so thinking about intermingled plants is a completely different way of gardening. Thinking about how plants propagate is also different, because usually when you're in traditional gardening, you don't want plants to propagate. If you look at gardening books, they'll say, oh, be careful about this plant because it spreads like crazy. Or, this plant will seed out and you'll be cussing it. And, because if you want everything to be discrete monocultures, you want to plant them, and you want them to just stay there and be happy and healthy and never change, never reproduce, never move around. And the industry is happy to oblige, and probably, almost everything that we buy at Home Depot doesn't reproduce. Some of them do have rhizomes, but they don't reproduce the way native plants do. I love plants that are really aggressive. I use them, whether they have, aggressive rhizomes, whether they have aggressive stolons, whether they reseed like crazy. To me, those are all fantastic. And I mix them all together and they fight it out. And I don't have to worry about bare ground, about plants going away. If a plant dies, another one just pops right into place. So we're going to talk about these three different kinds of plants here, just real quickly. This is one of my favorite plants, and if you're involved with the plant sale, you really need to get this plant going. I have learned to rely on this almost as a go-to plant, the same way you would something like horse herb. This is an absolutely bulletproof native plant called Dicliptera bracteata. It's a rooteral. It's also a stress tolerator. This entire mass of plants came from one plant. And but I have also planted this in a polyculture, which I'm going to show you in a little bit, and it's happily coexisting with about 7 or 8 other species. So it's Dicliptera bracteata, branched foldwing. It's just a nice foliage plant most of the year. You know, it dies down in the winter, and then in the fall it has it's not terribly showy, but it looks like this in the fall for about 2 months. You know, it's very attractive to pollinators and lizards and all kinds of things. So you know, it's not that easy to find native plants for shady areas, and you know, this is a really fantastic base for a polyculture. So this is a ruderal. This is another ruderal, which some of you probably know, Aurelia nudiflora, and this happens to be at my house. I planted 5 or 6 of these along a bed, and now they're coming up, and this one's literally just growing on a little bit of soil that washed into an area of my driveway. It's growing straight on top of concrete. There's not a crack here or anything. It's been here for maybe 5 or 6 years. It's going to make it through this freeze. And then I've got it growing between the concrete in the house. I've got it growing in the actual seams in the concrete. You know, normally you would have the exotic weeds growing in these places, but if you plant, I mean, to me, that's a benefit. If you plant things that reseed like crazy, then the places where you would normally have weeds coming up, you have these beautiful native plants coming up. So that's not a bad thing in my book. So the ruderals are the ones that respond to stress by putting out lots and lots and lots of seeds. And they're a good thing. You know, I call it guerrilla gardening, because like the polyculture I did I've actually done 5 polycultures now on our campus, and they have ruderal plants in there, and I know that they're coming up all over the place. And I'm sure the landscape crews are getting mad. Why are these dadgum native plants coming up everywhere? You know, but they will spread, and that's a good thing. So then you have competitors, and they're plants that take advantage of all the resources they can muster and take out the competition. And so, you know, a lot of people are afraid of inland sea oats. I'm not, because I put things in with them that are just as, you know, aggressive as they are, or maybe more so. So I like this plant a lot in the shade. It will keep out some of the exotic species, and it'll hold its own, and you don't have to worry about it wimping out. You know, it's very tough, drought tolerant, but it is a classic competitor. If the conditions are just right, it will take over everything. But then you don't have to give it just the right conditions. You know, if you don't water so much, if you don't amend the soil, it's not nearly as aggressive as some people think. And then there are stress tolerators, plants that have adaptations to ensure survival when stress arises. And this is a purple threon. You can see it's right next to a Texas highway in the hot Texas sun, and it's looking pretty good. You know, so the way plants grow is they're very rarely a pure competitor or a pure ruderal or a pure stress tolerator. It's almost like a soil triangle, you know, where you have sand, silt, and clay. So you'll have one that is a competitor and a stress tolerator, or one that is a stress tolerator and a ruderal, which I would call the Dicliptera a stress tolerator and a ruderal. You know, you don't have to do this all scientifically. You kind of know, if you work with plants, oh, this is a plant you know, that I can put on the west side of a building and not water it much, and it's going to be perfectly happy. So it's definitely a stress tolerator, but at the same time, it reseeds a lot, but it doesn't have a rhizome. Okay, so now you've got a ruderal and a stress tolerator, but not a competitor. Or, you know what I mean? You can kind of figure it out. And there's no magic to putting this all together, but you need to make sure that these 3 things are covered. You want to have competitors, you want to have ruderals, and you want to have stress tolerators in order to make your polyculture resilient. So the search for urban polycultures begins with a few important principles. And here are some of the principles. For aesthetic character, regional character, environmental and ecological reasons, only plants that are indigenous to North Texas or your biome will be used. That is a big thing. It means you have to actually research. I've said I always look at Bonap. I've done a polyculture with Conoclinium coelestinum, which I like a lot. And, we're kind of over here, and you can see that it's native from our area, north, south, east, everywhere where it gets water. So that tells me a lot just by looking at this. Where is this thing native? It's not native over here. Whereas this plant here, which is also native, and it's native from our area west, I just did a polyculture using this plant too, because this plant is very, Artemisia ludovicana, the white sage, is used for Native American ceremonies, and we did a Native American land acknowledgement courtyard at UTA, and we planted a bunch of this just actually in early December of this year, and I mean they're still alive. Once I think once it warms up, they're going to be okay, but right now they don't look very good. Again, I know it's native, and I know it's probably going to need good drainage. It's going to be an upland plant because look where it's native, the Intermountain West, right? And I know it's plenty cold hardy all the way up into Canada, and so it's not temperature thing; it's more of a water thing. And this was kind of the inspiration, this kind of thing. So we're mixing it with Cytos grama and Gora Lindheimreich and a little blue stem, different things, kind of a short grass prairie with a sage. I think it's going to look really nice. Okay, so only perennials. You really have to make sure that you're using perennials. Don't use annuals or biennials because in small patches, you can't. They don't reliably reproduce. They almost an annual by definition reproduces by seed. And if the wind happens to be blowing the wrong way, maybe the seed ends up in your neighbor's yard, or if there's some freak freeze late in the season, maybe that year's crop all gets wiped out, or there's too many vagaries. So you want something that's tough and perennial, just to make sure that everything keeps going. If you have a big enough area, you can use annuals, and then, of course, the water conditions, whether it's the drainage in terms of inundation or whether it's irrigation, you need to make sure that they're compatible. I do believe in irrigating native plants. I irrigate less than most people, a lot less than some people. But if you say you're never going to irrigate, then you're basically saying, okay, I'm going to have a dormant garden in the summer and a dormant garden in the winter. And I'm going to have some things happening in the spring and some things happening in the fall. But, if you say, well, I'm going to irrigate once a month or once every 2 weeks, you're really not going to use that much water. You might only irrigate 4 or 5 times a year, and you'll have a much happier garden. That's my compromise on that. Not everybody agrees with me. And the plants have to have a good aesthetic presence and character. So not every native plant is going to be suitable if you want it to look a certain way, and that's a subjective thing. So I'm gonna describe this polyculture garden at Kappa, and then I'm gonna stop and I can go some more, but I want to get through this, and then we'll see where we are. So I think I've described this here before, but this is where I first started thinking about polycultures. I planted inland sea oats. I planted giant spiderwort, Tradescantia gigantea, at my home in Dallas, and in the 1990s. And then within a year or two, it started looking like this. And this was actually much nicer than either one separately. They really get along nicely. And Tradescantia, giant Tradescantia, the giant spiderwort, is actually a wonderful plant, but it really is kind of homely if you look at it by yourself. And it dies completely down in the summer. It goes down to nothing. It literally looks like a kite string. And by the way, every part of this plant is edible: flowers, stems, leaves, everything. Before, when we're designing a polyculture, we always do a matrix like this, and you can look in the Udolph book, and he talks about this also. So we've got the matrix plants, which is the garden matrix as opposed to the matrix plants. So that's a term. I'm not exactly sure where that came from, but it's the one that Udolph uses. So that's sort of the basic ground cover. That is the intermingled ground cover that is really not designed to be particularly showy. It's just sort of forming the base. It doesn't mean it can't bloom, but you can see I've got bloom in the spring, I've got bloom in the summer, I've got bloom in the fall, I've got structure in the winter. Chasmathium looks the ceos looks fantastic when it's dormant. I like it in some ways better when it's dormant than when it's alive, than when it's green. Salvia lyrata is green in the winter, and so forth. So we'll go through these one by one. So this is kind of the character of the matrix. It only looks like this for maybe a month or two out of the year, because what happens is that this is the Dicliptera, this is the ceots, and the Dicliptera just keeps growing until it's actually the same height as the ceots, and there's also some blooming things that happen. So this is when it's really at its low point. This is in July, in the summer. It's just basically green like this. You're going to see a lot of pictures in a minute. And then this is in November, but really starting in September, this is what the matrix looks like. And here you can see this is Dicliptera, this is ceots. You almost can't tell them apart. And that's to me is an interesting way to think about the matrix, is that so when you think about what is unifying these two plants, why does it look so cohesive? It's because of the texture, the relative coarseness of these leaves versus the grass leaves. It's almost the same. They both have vertical stems, very vertical stems. They're both the same height, and it really just kind of blends together really nicely. It looks very purposeful, even though it's a recombinant sort of chance mixing of native plants. And this has been here. I took this picture just this last November, so this has been in since 2015, so 8 years now. It's doing pretty good. Then you have accent plants, which Udolph describes as like boulders in a stream. Typically, the accent plants in most places are shrubs, because a lot of places around the country, they have shrubs everywhere. We don't have very many shrubs. So I kind of made that a little different. And so these Tradescantia, there's one here, there's a clump here, there's a clump here, there's a clump here. So there are sort of metaphorical boulders are actually clumps of perennials marching down the polyculture. And so this is what it looks like this is probably in like early April, something like that. And then in the summer, this is the fall obedient plant is doing the same thing. There's a clump here, there's a clump here, and it just continues on down. Some people are scared to death of this plant, but I promise you, if you have it mixed in with ceots and with Dicliptera and this is a solidago and lots of aggressive plants in here, they keep it in check. It's not as scary as you think, as long as you have other scary plants along with it. So that's the accent plants. And then this other category of plants, which is kind of interesting, is we call transparent scatter plants. And in our case, we put in Canada wild rye. So again, this is September 2021. So you can see that the wild rye is dyed all the way to the ground. There's no more grass there, and this is just dormant seed heads. But the entire polyculture has these dormant seed heads kind of dancing along through it, and it kind of moves your eye around and gives the composition a little bit of character. I tried cutting off the solidago, and I just did it that year. You see how crazy it looks when you cut it. It's a native solidago. It looks really weird, doesn't it? I mean, it's just amazing. I didn't know it was going to do that, but it still blooms, but it just looks really strange. I thought maybe, I don't know what I was going to do, but that's what it does, in case you're interested. And then there's also put an edger around the whole polyculture, which is an actual formal hedge, low hedge of coralberry. So if you're talking about native plants, using native plants, you have to be a little bit creative. So like I've made hedges out of skeleton leaf goldeneye. I've made hedges out of agarita. Those were in a project I did in Austin. And then, here coralberry. And so, when you can use native plants that people don't normally think of as hedging plants. So this is just we'll go through a quick picture show on the Polyculture at Kappa, and then I'll stop and we'll see where we are. So it started out with really, 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 really bad soil. There was no plants removed here. This had just been bare for years, and people were walking over it, and crews were driving on it with golf carts. It was compacted like crazy. We had to, even planting small plants, we had to use a pick to get through it. It was full of tree roots because they had mature cedar elms. Just the whole thing, it was just like the worst soil, and we really didn't amend the soil hardly at all. We put down about 1 inch of compost and a couple of inches of mulch, and that was it, and it's never been fertilized since. There you can see the students kind of getting after it, and there you see that we have, you know, some of the compost that's already gone down. It was really, really, really terrible soil. Here we are about 2 years after planting, or actually the second winter after planting. So you see the coralberry is all dormant, and the sea oats is all dormant. You can see the Tradescantia is greening up, right? Because it's counter-cyclical, just like the Canada wild rye. And this is actually a good thing, you know, because it educates the people so much. I get, you know, they think everything's dead, and they just go, oh my God, you know. In fact, that big freeze we had 2 years ago, where it got, you know, 1 degree below zero, whatever. I mean, this thing just looks so dormant, and I would say 50% of all the plants on the campus died. We didn't have anything die in our polyculture, and that's really sold them. So here we are in like February 2nd, 2017, right? It was February 2nd today. This is what it looks like right now. Well, sort of. This is what it looks like right now. There's a lot more vegetation. I just took this picture about 2 weeks ago, but it was after that big freeze we had. And you see the Solidago, and you can see the Canada wild rye, and you can, you know, see it has a lot more green because there's a lot more Tradescantia and wild rye than there was. But back in 2017, this is what it looked like. And then you can see just a few weeks later, March 7th, that's about when the action starts. And then you can see the Tradescantia and the wild rye getting going, the coralberry greening up. And here it is, like 2.5 weeks later. And I promise you, everybody gets all excited when they see this, because it's like a miracle, you know. So I love gardens that really go down in the winter and then they come back. And because, you know, in our campus, everything is evergreens. It's Indian hawthorn and all that stuff, and abelia. And it's hard to, you know, this university is still not on board, but the students and the faculty really, this is when they go, oh, the garden is so cool. And then you can see in April, the Tradescantia is even doing more. And then it's kind of starting to go away towards the end of April, but there's still some plants in there. If you look, like this is the golden zyssia, you know, which is a prairie plant. There's Aurelia in there just starting to bloom now. And there's different things happening in here that we, you know, kind of hard to show from the picture. And then by June, it's you know, it's like, you know, it's just kind of a green mass. But then in usually starting in maybe late July, early August, that's when the physosthesia kicks in. So that creates a little extra interest. And of course, you've got the Solidago and things growing too. And then in the fall, that's where we could get the nice matrix, which we showed before. And then that's where we are right now. So we've also, we do a plant census. We used to do it every year. With COVID, we've been doing it maybe every other year, and where we actually go through, there's your Dichlictera, and we measure, we do transects and intercepts, and you know, we try to keep track of what's increasing and what's decreasing. There's some plants didn't work at all, and some plants have done really well. We look at the percentage coverage, and that, which is really not very accurate. The stems is really the best way to count it, to do it, but we do the percent coverage also. And then we do bio blitzes, where see how pretty that Dichlictera is, and there's an anole in there. What's not to love? We you know, we look at everything. We found walking sticks, we found praying mantises, you know. We've got even earwigs, you know, which are great, you know, for the soil. I mean, in grubworms, I don't have any problem with grubworms. You know, all these, and bees. And by the way, if you've ever tried to take a picture, I took that picture of a little tiny bee. This is in coralberry. It's really hard to do. Try it sometime. You'll appreciate it anytime you see a picture of a bee. I promise you. We look for mushrooms, so maybe I should stop right there. Do I have time to talk about some of the caveats on polycultures?
I keep going.
Oh, okay. Okay, because I do want to point out some things, some kind of lessons learned, because because I'm a gardener in addition to being a landscape architect and a designer and all that. So one of them is that you need to make sure that you have some bulletproof species in the matrix. If the accent plants go away, or if the scatter plants go away, if something doesn't work out, you've still got a nice ground cover. But I thought I was a genius. I thought, oh, I'm going to use Mimosa striculosa, which has this nice bloom and it's very fine textured, and I'd mix it in with frog fruit. And of course, they're both native. And I thought, boy, that's really going to work. And this is it planted. This is my house, one part of my house. And this is May of 2016. And in September, it looked like this. And I thought, holy smokes, I'm really onto something. But by a year later, half of it was gone. And by 2 years later, it was all gone. And I have never been able to figure out a way to keep frog fruit going. I'm not saying it's impossible. The only frog fruit that I've ever been able to keep going is growing on concrete in my driveway without any soil. And it's been there for maybe 6 or 7 years, and it looks great. Every year it comes back, it stays green all summer, it blooms in the spring, in the early summer. And but anytime I put it in the ground, it does this. It takes over, it looks fantastic, and then it just goes away. So you really need to make sure that this was going to be the base for a matrix that I was then going to jazz up and add all the other stuff, but this matrix failed miserably. So here's another interesting example of another one of my failures. Is that I put a ruderal plant, which is lyre-leaf sage, and I put it in with Scutellaria ovata, and I thought, well, the lyre-leaf sage would bloom first because it blooms about 3 or 4 weeks before the Scutellaria does, and I like them both very much. Particularly the Scutellaria is a fantastic ground cover, but it is very aggressive. But after it had been in the ground about 3 or 4 years, this is what it looked like. Is that the lyre-leaf sage had moved over to where there's a little bit of a hill and where it's drier and there's more stress, and then where the conditions are better, the Scutellaria just completely wiped it out, and so they're not compatible. So if you have a crazy aggressive plant, this is in the mint family, then you have a plant that is maybe a stress tolerator but not as crazy aggressive, although this reseeds very aggressively. You need to make sure that this plant is bigger, and if it's bigger, it'll hold its own. But since this one's actually even a little bit smaller than this one, it didn't stand a chance. So really thinking about I have the database, have maybe 350 plants that I've qualified out of. I started out with almost 7,000 plants, a list from Britt that I got from Bob O'Kennon, all the stuff that he found growing in Texas. And first I said, well, okay, what's native to the DFW area? I came up with about 1,000. And then I started qualifying them, making sure that it's perennial, that it's that perennial and native and all that kind of stuff. And then that 1,000 is where I am right now. I'm up to about I've figured out this database for about 350 of them. I'm hoping to come up with a database where you can search for these different things. But this mode of spread is really important. Is it a ruderal, increaser, stress tolerator, relative aggressiveness? If you don't have that figured out, which if you've done some gardening for a long time, you can figure it out kind of intuitively. It doesn't have to be scientific. Doesn't have to be perfect. They'll kind of find their way. But I didn't know when I was starting out doing this how important that is, because we don't normally think about how plants increase. In monocultures, you just plant it and there it is. But in a polyculture, they're constantly moving, dying, reproducing, competing for resources, helping each other. I mean, it's a much more complicated thing, but it all works out. Okay, so this was another questionably successful, shall we say, project, which is now basically gone completely. And this was actually the first polyculture that I designed, and the first one. And so, I made some mistakes, and one of the mistakes was that I didn't fight hard enough to on the spacing of the plants. So you can see that there's like one plant here, so if I told them to put something 18 inches on center, they said, oh, you landscape architects, you're always spacing things too close. We should put it 3 feet on center or 5 feet on center. And then they put a lot of mulch in between, which is really what you don't want on a polyculture. You want very minimal amount of mulch, and the mulch should be very, very finely ground. Otherwise, the plants can't increase. The rhizomes don't work. It won't seed. And so anyway, it started out way too sparse, which led to all kinds of weed issues. So this is May 10th, 2016. Here's July. You can see it's things are kind of trying to grow together, but you can see that there are big gaps. You don't want big gaps like that when you plant a polyculture. The plants really should be solid vegetation when it first goes in. That's really important. And then you can leave big gaps like that, but then you have to weed it constantly, which is not fun. It's not me, is it? Somebody mute your mic. I think that'll solve that. So this is what I was wanting it to look like, so this was about 2 years after it was planted, and you can see this is a polyculture. There's 6 plants in here. Then this is a different polyculture, but the reason I like this picture is because you can see how they're aesthetically qualified, that these plants all kind of go together. These plants, they all have a kind of an upright to diagonal line. They're all kind of bunch forms. This is seep muley, and this is a juncus, and there's all kinds of great stuff in there. But it was never plant. You can see even back here, even when I took that picture, you see all these gaps in bare ground, and that's just a prescription for weeds coming in. This is again the January of 2018. So it looked pretty good in the winter too. But if you look at it now, it's all gone. It wasn't maintained, and I think if it had been more successful, if it had been less work, because it really had a weed problem, maybe it would have stayed. And also, I didn't understand ecological retention structures the way I do now, and these plants need too much water. I should have chosen species. I was thinking, well, it's going to get wet, it's going to be inundated, but that's not really the way they work. Yes, water comes in, but it immediately goes out, and as soon as it stops raining, it's bone dry. So you need more of a facultative plant, not a facultative wetland plant. And facultative meaning that you're just as likely to find it in an upland area or as in a lowland area. Something that can take a lot of drought but can also take water. So I didn't qualify these plants carefully enough. So I'm willing to own up to that. But I think you can see kind of, you can see the, the aesthetics of it, of where you have a frame, which kind of makes it feel like it's purposeful. And then you have the matrix, the 2 matrices that are, that look like they kind of, the plants all look like they kind of go together. So this is a really good example of that. And signage is good. We put this sign in just to try to explain to people what's going on. But you see all this bare ground. I mean, that's just a prescription for disaster. So final lesson is that you can design polycultures, and it's time to get moving. So I can show you one more polyculture, or we can stop and take questions. I'm open to suggestions.
One more.
One more. I noticed in your, I think I may have showed you this one before, but I noticed in your newsletter that you were touting Phlox pilosa, which I love Phlox pilosa. And this is a simple little polyculture in my front yard. This is early March 10th, 2017. This is Phlox pilosa. I planted 3 1-gallon plants, and I planted 1 pot of golden groundsel, which I divided up into about 7 clumps, 1 little clump, 1 little, I mean, literally the clumps like the size of a shot glass. And then the rest of it is just horse herb. And the reason I want to show you this is the horse herb is a rooterel, it reseeds. The Phlox pilosa and the golden groundsel are classic increasers. And so here you can see in 2018, 1 year later, look how much more groundsel there is. See that? And then 1 year after that, look how much more even. So that 1 little clump grew to all of that. Of course, the horse herb is still there. And the same thing happened with the phlox. So here's the phlox. The phlox blooms later. And so it's coming up through the horse herb, a little clump here, a little clump here, 2017. Here it's coming up through the horse herb again, 2018. But you can see how much more. Again, this is 3 1-gallon plants. And then look at this, 2019. So the phlox is a fantastic plant. It's green right now, even through all this the 10-degree weather and everything. The phlox is green, and I actually have it. This tree unfortunately died. This is a large post oak. It never came back from the big freeze, which nearly killed me. But so now I've gone from a full shade garden to a full sun garden, and interestingly. The full sun has made the native asters, the Texas aster, it's made them very prolific, and which I really like that plant anyway. And in this whole area, just in this area, I let the asters really take off, and the phlox is happy growing with the asters because the asters, they're about 3 feet tall, and they just provide a little bit of filtered shade for the phlox. Which is kind of interesting. So I've actually collected seed from this, and we've got that Native American polyculture at Kappa. I'm going to plant a bunch of that native aster because it turns out that was something they use for sweat lodges, and every plant that's at the Native American courtyard is a plant that has a connection to lots of the First Nations around here, and so I think they're going to enjoy that. But that was a case of another case of active maintenance, seeing a plant, identifying it, deciding, maybe this is not the enemy. And now I've made a new friend, because you can't plant asters in a shady, under a big tree. But boy, in the sun, they're very happy, and they have a little white flower, not terribly showy, but they are showy. They're kind of nice in the winter. They have kind of a fluffy seed on them. And the pollinators just went crazy, absolutely crazy when it bloomed. It was just a riot of bees and moths and everything else. Okay, so matrix, accents, scatter plants that edger as frame, rooterels, increasers, and stress tolerators. And if you're interested in learning more, you can just Google Hopman Polyculture or Hopman PPN. I've written a series of 10 essays for the American Society of Landscape Architects where I talk about gardening. Maybe you don't need to read the first 3 or 4, but I basically go through my evolution of the different things that I was interested in. I was interested in fine gardening, and then I was interested in plants that are better adapted, and then I was interested in the native and adapted plant palette, and then I started thinking, well, why not just finding out all the advantages of natives, and then finally I ended up at Polycultures, and so you can read that whole thing if you're into that sort of thing. So I think this might be a good time to maybe take some questions.
Perfect. You see the comments there. We had filled up. Only can take 100 people can sign up, and
Oh, that's great.
Somebody wrote there that they were watching, they had to take a break, and then it filled up, and they are upset because they couldn't get back in.
You snooze, you lose, right?
We're recording this, and it'll be posted somewhere, I guess, on our down the road for anybody.
Yes, it will.
Usually,
Frank,
when
you have some reverb.
Yeah, usually when you get that reverb, it means you have two computers on the same channel. and
Hey, David, how did your horse herd do when you lost your tree?
The horse herb is fine. You know, horse herb likes sun. It can grow in full sun. It doesn't grow in full sun because other full sun plants outcompete it. But what happens is that when you grow horse herb in shade, you know it'll get about 7 or 8 inches tall, and then it actually looks pretty ratty. You know, later in the summer. What I used to do was in June I would just mow the whole thing to get it a little shorter, and then it would look good. But what happens in full sun is that the horse herb stays really short. So it's green all summer, but it's only maybe 2 or 3 inches tall maximum.
So it doesn't do too bad with the sun.
No, no, not at all.
Okay.
The golden groundsel is really suffering, and I do have some Oklahoma red buds that are where the golden groundsel is still there. And my strategy for this area is I've let every tree that wants to grow. I've got a sucker from the original post oak that's about 2 feet tall now, which I'm definitely going to let grow. But I've got red oaks, I've got cedar elms, I've got probably 20 Eve's necklace coming up all over the place.
Eve's necklace. So Eve's necklace has been a bane of my existence because
but I'm letting them all grow.
It's just they just come up everywhere, and I keep chopping them. But do you just kind of treat them like shrubs or something?
Well, what I'm doing is I'm trying to get back into shade, and my strategy is going to be to let every tree grow until they're maybe all like 6 or 7 feet tall, and then every year I'm just going to take out a couple of trees until eventually I end up with one. Or two. So, but I have 2 polar bears. I have one 23-pound, gigantic polar bear that can take a 2.5-inch tree out of the ground, and then I have a small one that's only 4 feet tall that only weighs 5 pounds that takes out anything up to about 3/4-inch caliper. And so, if you're working with polycultures, I think it's great to have a tool like that because, the trees are really the only thing that gets in there. You are going to get some smilax, but it's mainly trees. And, if you keep cutting them off, they just keep coming back, right? But if you get the
I was trying to decide if I was going to maybe treat my trees like shrubs.
Mm-hmm.
Like just keep kind of training them to be low growing.
Yeah. I mean,
maybe it won't work. I don't know.
No, it will. I had a neighbor who actually had a ground cover of cedar elms about 8 inches tall. Thousands of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like a ground cover, but you just kind of keep at it. You keep shaving them down, and then they just keep, hopefully just low growing.
Yeah, and also I have a big bed, several big beds of southern wood fern, which I like a lot. And I think that the Eve's necklace, the ones popping up out of the ground, I think they look really nice.
They look a little ferny, don't they?
They do look a little ferny. So if they're like 2 or 3 feet tall, just kind of poking up. They really look nice mixed in with the
and they certainly seem to want to do that.
Yeah. So why not?
Why not, right? Yeah, let them grow a little bit, and kind of keep them under control to some extent, because Eve's necklaces are they are so aggressive. They
don't have a rhizome, but they reseed. Yeah,
they certainly do.
Yeah, but they're I don't have any problem with it. And if I have to pull out 10 East Necklace a year in my front yard with my polar bear. That's no big deal. We'll just go out there and pop them out of the ground.
I have a small garden with horse herb in the front yard. Just kind of sidewalk goes by it, so it's kind of blocked off by itself. And I put American germander in there with it. And that's really worked well. It's real nice.
Yeah. The horse herb is it's such a fantastic plant. It's so versatile and it's so easy, and it's not aggressive enough that it outcompetes things. You can mix almost anything with it.
And you can mow it.
Excuse me?
And you can mow it.
Yeah, you can mow it. Exactly. I usually do mow it. It looks better if you mow it. But use a battery powered mower.
Yeah.
Or a plug-in mower. But again, if you're thinking about an aesthetically qualified polyculture and you're using horse herb, then if you're mixing low things in with it, try to think of things that are fine textured, kind of like the horse herb, rather than like salvia lirata with horse herb would be kind of weird because it has these big clunky leaves, and it would the two don't really go together. Whereas something like the Phlox pilosa, the leaves are more delicate, they're smaller. So if you start thinking that way, you'll create a garden that's a little more unified.
Dana asked what building that's your architecture building, is where the pictures were taken that you were showing there on the campus, the UTA.
Yes. Yeah, if you, it's on Netterman Drive, and we've got 2 polycultures there. One of them has been there for 8 years, and one of them we're just getting started on. There's 2 raised planters. And then the Native American courtyard, which is all polycultures, actually has 3 different polycultures, is right by the main library, just north of the main library. There's a roundhouse. There's a plant that used to be called the Roundhouse Planetarium. And there's a stone there with a plaque talking about, with a land acknowledgement statement, talking about the Native Americans. So that was a really big deal for me. It was October 10th. It was on Columbus Day, of course, that we dedicated it. And I have to say that there's some of the nicest people that I've ever dealt with, and I've dealt with a lot of community people. And we had Pawnee, we had Keachai, we had Tawakoni, we had Wichita, Caddo. Lots of different nations were represented, and there's the UTA actually has the oldest Native American Student Association in Texas. They've been on campus, but they've been kind of under the radar. They're coming up out of the radar now. So
I think that the idea of the Native American courtyard was to kind of acknowledge that we took over the land that those tribes, that those nations had occupied, and we were kind of like giving them their due, right?
Yeah, and but also it's not just a historical thing; it's an active thing. Like I said, all of the plants there are deeply resonant. And even on the opening day, where we had 300 people at the opening day, there were people praying, right next to the plants that were the sort of for the ceremonial for ceremonial purposes. The idea is to give them a place on campus where they can feel at home, where they can bring family, where they can, some place to kind of call their own, which is kind of interesting and ironic because there is no place on campus for anybody else.
Right.
UTA is a very placeless kind of place, but it's a beginning, and the same thing with the first place on campus that I've been allowed to design a polyculture that I didn't install myself, and that basically the ones around Kappa, the university said, okay, you can do it, but we want nothing to do with it. We're not going to pay for it. We're not going to maintain it. It's kind of, you break it, you own it, But this one, they actually installed it, and there was some hardscape construction also. They paid for it. I didn't have to pay for it like I did the other ones. It's interesting that the sensibility and the sensitivity to the sensibilities of the Native Americans are what allowed the university to sort of get over the hump and allow us to put a polyculture or 3 different polycultures in a very prominent area of the campus that they would have never allowed in a million years if it hadn't been for the Native Americans. So it's just an interesting way that things come together,
Yeah. So, David, when you along Netterman Drive, where you were showing those photos, at one point it looked like they were dormant, right? And then they were green. Did you just shave everything? Did you shave to the ground to allow that greenery to come up, or did the green, did it overcome the see?
Well, what we do is in about 2 weeks, I'm going to go out with my class and we're going to remove all the biomass. So what we do,
so you
we take all this
shave
stuff.
it down. You cut it all down.
Yeah, we just break all this. You just grab it and break it. We don't actually go in here with any equipment, but we're going to take all the biomass.
You don't dig anything out.
No, we don't dig anything out.
Ground.
And what we do is we take all of this biomass and we put it into bags and we take it over to Trading House Creek, which is right over here, and we dump it all in the creek because these are all native plants and they're full of seeds. And so all of this stuff's going to be coming up along the creek. And so, that's actually a good thing too. Again, talking about kind of guerrilla gardening, but by leaving it and when I did the polycultures for the Native American courtyard, every plant that I specified, I put in there, I said, do not cut it down until February 15th, because you want these seeds to have a chance to fall off, to get eaten, to scarify, so by the time we remove it, pretty much all the seeds are gone. The Dicliptera seeds are gone. Most of the inland sea oat seeds have fallen off. And then we just leave all that on the ground. Yeah. And this is very, very low maintenance. In fact, during COVID, this had no maintenance for over 2 years, nothing. The only thing that really happened, and which is predictable, was that the stolons from the coralberry were creeping in. So we had to go in last fall. We went in and we cut we went in there with pliers and snippers and cut all the stolons off so that the coralberry wouldn't just take over everything.
Kind of would stay as a border.
Yeah, I want to keep it as a hedge.
Right.
It makes a very nice hedge.
Right.
We had a few questions on the chat. Let's see, one here from Marcy Delgado, our president. Are patented nativars sterile like other modified crop plants? And what benefit does a patent provide to the grower? Oh,
well, I don't claim to be an expert at the nativars. I know some of them do reproduce, but I don't recommend them. I don't use them. I haven't tested them. I don't study them. So, but that's a really good question. Some of them are, the patenting. Of course, that means that proven winners or Monrovia. That means that they are the only one that can sell it. Every time you buy that plant has been patented. They get some money. So that's the big advantage. And, for me, an interesting thing that's just happened is that I'm one of the officers in the Planting Design Professional Practice Network for American Society of Landscape Architects. I have been for many years. And proven winners has been kind of my nemesis. I've assassinated them every way I can. I mean, I have whole PowerPoints about all the awful things they've done. They're one of the reasons why we have so few native plants. They promote. I mean, if you were a landscape architect, you would get constant promotion. Oh, you got to use this plant. It's so fantastic. And it's always something that doesn't grow in your area. And which means you have to modify the soil and all, you know, they're just terrible, you know. And now there's a new officer in the planting design PPN who's from proven winners. And so
oh my God.
So, you know, I'm going to let him have it. You know, I really think it's time to you know, to get off the stick, you know, and
call that a frenemy.
Excuse me?
It's a frenemy. You call that person a frenemy.
Well, I call him an enemy, not a friend. No, because the amount of damage they've done. I mean, you guys don't see it, but I see it. Like, I've been to meetings at the Dallas Botanic Garden, which is no friend either, believe me. And they'll have like 150 landscape architects and horticulturalists that they'll come and they'll wine you and dine you and give you all this free stuff. And then Proven Winners comes in and gives a song and dance and presents like 20 or 25 of the latest and greatest, you know, some new form of Loropetalum or some new this or new that. And every single plant are plants that were developed in Georgia and need acid soil, and everybody's, you know, Neil Sperry is usually there talking about how dumb native plants are. He'll get up and spend a solid hour talking about everything that's wrong with native plants, you know, because he gets his money from
sounds like
vendors.
Pharmaceutical reps for plants.
Yeah, exactly. So they, you know, and even I'm not going to mention any names, but I like to assassinate people, but not landscape architects.
Yeah.
But some really well-known landscape architects who are famous for native plant design, I'll come up to them and go, "Can you believe this?" And they go, "Oh, I like it." You know, I'm like, "Oh my God." So, you know, people get brainwashed, and so this is what we're up against. You know, I mean, I'm just somebody. You know, I'm just a professor. I don't have the big. They have millions of dollars marketing.
It's a big business.
It's huge business, you know.
But David, do they make any attempt to argue that their plants are attracted to pollinators, or have they had any kind of argument in that regard?
Well, yes, but there are, as I mentioned, that's why I mentioned that tropical milkweed, because if you go to like I said, you go to almost any monarch way station, or, you know, any where you would think you would have native plants, you almost always see that tropical milkweed. And so there you can say that some plants are attractive to pollinators. They may not be as attractive, but they have a lot
of. They're not telling the whole story.
Well, and we don't know what the whole story is. You know, we can't, as designers, we can't possibly know all of the implications of everything that we do. And so my default position is, if you use a native plant, all of that ecological stuff is already baked in. You don't have to worry about it. You're not going to be screwing anything up because they're already here. But if you
don't have to engineer it.
Yeah.
You don't have to, you know, it's like they're engineering around the whole native plant idea.
Well, and it all, once again, it all comes back to that original sin of monocultures.
Right.
Because once you decide I'm going to use a monoculture, now you need a plant that looks good all year, that blooms a long time, you know, that stays put, that doesn't reproduce. You know, it all of a sudden brings up a whole series of criteria that native plants are mostly ill adapted for. You know, we don't have that many native plants that have those kind of criteria. So you have to look for different criteria.
Yeah, you have to be willing, you have to be open to the idea of a landscape changing all the time.
Exactly. And this one reason why I show these pictures is that it's not the same, you know, on
month to month, season
month to month, it changes, and you can make it change as much as you want, you know. And remember, this is a full shade garden with, you know, full of tree roots, and it's right next to a building. It gets hot reflected heat. You know, this is west over here, so it gets a blast of western sun in the worst time of the year. I mean, this is a very difficult condition, and these plants are as happy as they can be, you know.
This is beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Another question from Madison Gover is, are we basing the definition on recorded historical presence? And there I take it she's referring to whether a plant is native or not. And she goes on to say, because what is recorded now is not native, could actually have been native hundreds of years ago.
Well, but how would you know that? And I guess my argument would be, we go on the best information we have. And so we have trained botanists who are going out and all over the United States, and plant hunters, biologists, ecologists. They're out looking. They're looking in undeveloped areas. So if something is growing in somebody's backyard, that doesn't necessarily count because you don't know how it got there. But if it's growing in an abandoned lot, they will count that. So they don't just count native stuff, they count everything. So Bonap has all of the exotic plants. It has over 24,000 species from all over the United States. Doesn't just have native plants, but people who are the best scientists that we have, and we can only use who we have figured out where that plant came from, where it evolved, how it got over here, all this kind of, now they're doing it with genetic testing. It doesn't mean that it's a perfect science. It doesn't mean there aren't plants that haven't been discovered, like the one that was just discovered by Britt. There's a lot of plants, there's animals that haven't been discovered yet, but there are a lot of plants that have been discovered. The flora of north central Texas was published, I don't know, 25 years ago or something. It's been a while, and it has about 3,500 species. So there's a lot of stuff that's growing out in the wild without human intervention. We just use the best knowledge. I don't claim to be any kind of hotshot botanist, but the people at Britt, some of them, Barney and Bob O'Cannon and all those people, they know what they're doing, or they know as well as anybody else does. It's not a perfect science. I'm perfectly willing to acknowledge that.
Holly Karen asked, what is the most reliable published resource for local native species?
Well, I suggest that no matter where you are, that you start with Bonap, Biota of North America project at the University of North Carolina. They're our clearinghouse. So all of the information that Britt has for North Central Texas has been uploaded to Bonap. And then there are botanists all over the United States who have uploaded to Bonap, and so they have every county of the entire United States represented. And so that's a good place to start. The two sources that I usually look at are I first look at Bonap, and then sometimes I will look at the flora of North Central Texas. And those are, there's nobody else that's even close in terms of being an authoritative source. The flora of North Central Texas will give you sometimes a little bit more information. They'll say, well, we found it in, in this county, kind of in the near streams, or, they'll be a little bit more descriptive. But if you know where you're, if you go to EPA level 4 or even EPA level 3, ecological zones, which is the whole United States, and then you overlay counties where the plant is native, you'll see how that kind of lines up with where we are, or doesn't line up, or whatever. Depends on how much you want to dig into it. But I would look at those two things. And if you're nervous, then don't choose a plant like red yucca that has only been found a couple of times in one county in the entire metroplex. That's a really iffy provenance for the plant. It means it's really not tied into the ecology of the area. It was just some kind of outlier. Why it was there, who knows? Sometimes you'll see stuff like that, like the stock tanks at the LBJ grasslands. There's 1,200 of them, and there are plants growing up there wild. that really, I mean, they're native plants, but you really don't find them up there because it's too dry. It normally would be a little bit east, but they're there because they have all those artificial stock tanks. So you can find outliers, you know, but you know, if the plant is native all around, you know, all over the place, and you know it's really a native plant.
One more question I'm going to do, Dorothy Bushell. It's while one major challenge is locating native plants, another is finding examples and landscape plans for home gardeners to use. Do you have any suggestions on where to find good plans?
No, I really don't, because I don't know that there is such a thing, really. You know, obviously Sally Wasowski's is a great place to start. You know, everybody knows the Texas Native Plants book. And she does have some intermingled combinations. I think that's probably as good as any as far as a place to start. You know, that book was done a long time ago, and some of the plants that the gardens that she had will have plants that aren't native to a particular place. So you have to do a little bit of qualifying, but I think you could get started using her plans. You know, she has plans for escarpment areas, for blackland, for post oak. Hill country is basically the escarpment plan. I think if you don't have that already, that's a great place to start. If you really want to learn planting design, I mean, that's a whole nother thing. But if you get that Udolph book, you're going to learn how to kind of the principles behind using these native polycultures. And then you can just start picking out your own. It can be very simple. You could have maybe 2 or 3 plants for your matrix, and maybe 1 accent plant, and then maybe you'll one day go, oh, look at that. That would make it. You know, I'm looking at this thing. Maybe this grass right here could be a scatter plant because it's kind of poking up. It's emergent. You know, so learning some of the principles, I think, is maybe more important. I'm really hoping that I can find some people around the country that are doing this. I haven't yet, but I remain hopeful.
Will they learn anything from your book?
Well, yeah, they will. Because my book is really written for it's written for architects, landscape architects, planners, maybe cultural geographers. So I think, you know, I'm very interested in plants, and some of the leading figures in planning and landscape architecture, people like Patrick Geddes, use the way plants work to talk about how cultures evolve and how, you know, civilization evolves. And so that's all kind of a part of the same note, as Frank Zappa used to say. It's all part of the big note. And so I do try to tie in this intermingled planting design into a kind of reconceptualization, which is part of the thread that goes through the creativity part of the book. And, you know, when you're talking about design in general, instead of doing the same thing over and over and over. So maybe.
That's urban, right? Right. You're getting into urban. Yeah. Okay. Landscaping. I think it's, yeah. So
I wish I had the book out. It's actually out to readers right now. It's all fully copy edited. It's a big sprawling book. I've spent years working on it. It's 300 pages long. It's got 175 images. And I'm very proud of it. But
look for it for a Christmas present.
You know, I thought it would be out like 3 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So, but it's completely finished. It's out to readers. They're going to read it, and hopefully they'll write a little blurb on the back saying how wonderful it is. And and then it's off to the printer. That's all. The only thing left to do. It's all finished. So we'll see. I really want to. I want to write a book about polycultures. I also want to see if I can. I have had some talk with the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. I really want to get them involved, because this is something that, you know, I've been kind of bowling alone on this, and I need to get a big organization cranking on this on this polyculture idea. One of my ideas is to try to get my database to the point where it's actually working up on the web, maybe on the Wildflower Center's website, so that I can put principles that you can find plants, just for North Central Texas, and then maybe they could start developing the same thing for different areas around the country. That's sort of my long-term goal with all this. But we'll see.
We have a website. Native Plant Society has got it working.
Yeah, that would be another way to go. I'm looking for the organization with the biggest reach, and they just they're a national presence, and they just have so much so much support, and also they're I'm a professor in the UT system, and but yeah, the native plant societies are great. I mean you guys are doing all the right things.
Kim can probably speak to it a bit more than I can, Kim Conroe. But the state is working on a database that will be enrolled. You might be interested in like
we are
with the state
website.
Yeah, but what are you talking about? The state Native Plant Society?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So on our new website, we're going to have a native. It's obviously won't be finished when we launch, but it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
We are not trying to repeat what Lady Bird Johnson has done and try to encompass every single native plant in Texas. So we'll mainly be focusing just on landscaping plants. And we're starting with plants that are pretty much available in the nursery trade. So that's, one of our goals is also to expand the palette of native plants that are in the nursery trade, of course. So that's how we were founded. That's what the Native Plant Society was founded on. So it's an ongoing process, but we will have a database there. And wow, we would certainly love to have you as part of that. That would be great.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be great too. So we should keep the lines of communication open, and please think about Dicliptera, because it's really.
It's beautiful.
And you can't buy it anywhere. You can Google it. It's not for sale anywhere. It's never been for sale. And it's a no-brainer. I promise you, it is a no-brainer.
And it's easy to grow. So it
unbelievably easy.
It should be in the nursery trade. The whole process is getting the growers to see that there's a market. So then we have to get our nice nurseries to promote the plants, and we have to get the word out. It's a good plant. So it's sort of like this, loop that feeds on itself.
Right.
And we have to jump in the right place to make it work.
Yeah. Oh, well, I remember when I started out, Salvia greggii was considered this exotic, weird plant that only, super specialty nursery fed. And, so it is possible to get things, even though it's not native here.
Is.
It's
how would we get that particular the Dicliptera bacteria? How would we get that for our plant sale in May?
That's a good question. I don't know. It would have to be from seed. I've got it all over my yard. I would suggest that what you guys do is maybe you could come over to my house and dig up about 10 of them and give it to some growers and let them just plunk it in the ground, maybe and watch it. I promise if they put it in the ground a year later, you'll have a lot more. It'll start coming up all over the place, and then they could dig those, or but they need to see how incredibly easy it is to grow, how it looks good when it's not blooming. When it's not blooming, it has nice foliage, and the foliage stays nice and green all summer. It's very drought tolerant. And it's actually technically, I think, a wetland plant. I think that's the only thing.
I was going to ask that.
I'd be happy to come get some.
Excuse me?
Dana's in Arlington. She said she'd be happy to come get some.
Oh, yeah. And I'm happy to share. Absolutely. It might be a little hard to find now. I mean, if you came to my house in May or something, it'll be 6 or 8 inches tall, and you can just dig some up and take it. But I think, and do you guys know the Texas Discovery Gardens? Do you know Carrie Gray Harrison that works over there? That's where I got this. They had 50 of them.
Oh, okay.
And
Wow.
and they said nobody was buying them and they weren't going to carry them anymore. And I said, I'll buy all 50. And I bought them right on the spot. And I think I paid $25 for 51-gallon plants.
Wow.
And those are the ones that went to our Kappa Polyculture. But then some of them fell off the truck and ended up at my house. I don't know how that happens, but it does sometimes.
Well, you bought them. Hey, one plant you don't use that I'm surprised of is Monarda fistulosa. Are you familiar with that plant? I think it's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, there are a lot of great plants. My yard was 100% shade, and so I really like shade gardening, and I really think that in urban areas we need to think about shade plants. And lots of trees, and we have the urban heat island. We have, it saves energy, and you really don't want a lot of sun-loving plants in urban areas. That means you've got hot baking sun. You want biomass over the hardscape. So again, thinking about urban conditions, most of my experimentation and the polycultures I've done so far, except for the one at Britt. Well, actually, the one at UTA, I have one that's in full sun and 2 that are in shade. Because UTA has a lot of big trees, but we have one area that was full sun. So there's just so many plants, but I have not experimented with sun plants the way I have with shade. That's one other reason why I was so excited about this, is this plant loves shade. And there aren't that many native plants that do love shade.
The other thing is, I have a lot of hackberry trees in my garden, and they're allelopathic, and so I've managed to get a few things to grow, but boy, it's really hard. Do you have any really good plants that'll just take off under a hackberry?
I don't know. I had a big hackberry in Dallas, and it seemed like everything was growing fine.
Really?
What are the plants that you've had trouble growing? Have you had trouble growing horse herb under a hackberry?
No, that one I've grown. I've grown horse herb, and I've grown,
I'll bet diclip
grow, but
I'll bet diclip.
I'll try the Oh, good. Okay, I'll come over and dig some up and try that.
Yeah. So if I give you guys
some obedient plants have grown. Yeah, but some horse elbow bush will grow.
I'm sure all the stuff we can. I'm sure sea oats would grow, coralberry would grow. Teucrium canadens would grow. Gora, not Gora. The white avens. I can't remember the. Gayum canadens, which I have that all over my yard. I really like that. It looks like almost looks like ivy in the winter, the evergreen rosette. It's evergreen right now. And then it blooms white in the spring. And then after it blooms, it has really nice seed heads the whole rest of the summer and into the fall. So I'm a big fan of that one.
Yeah, I have a bodark, and I have a frostweed, scarlet sage.
Frostweed.
What else I've got? Oh, wood fern.
And
I've got several false nettle. They're not so showy, but they bring in. I now have a lot of butterflies because of that false nettle.
I love that.
Yeah. So the challenge is, I mean, if you're interested in this sort of thing, is do you just use what works horticulturally, or do you start aesthetically qualifying it? If you have wood fern, what are the characteristics of wood fern? It's coarse, it's a certain height, it has a certain shape, kind of a fountain shape. So if you look, so like when I have a bed of wood fern, and I think wood fern and Turk's cap go really well together, because they're both very coarse. And by the way, if you grow Turk's cap, if you cut it in half about mid-June, it just changes the whole look. All of a sudden, the plant is like 3 feet tall and even, and I mean, it just makes all the difference in the world. You know, they can get really tall and sprawly, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but I want people who aren't as forgiving of disorder to be able to do this kind of thing too, you know. And so that's one reason why I'm thinking about some of these plants like the Dichlyptra that actually look a little bit more cultured, you know. Like I have frostweed too, but it tends to be sort of isolated and a big sprawling thing, and I haven't quite figured out how to integrate it. It might look good with Turk's cap, I don't know. In fact, I did plant it with Turk's cap, but the Turk's cap ate it.
Yeah, well, I have mine growing with Turk's cap. Actually, I have Turk's cap also growing under that bodark tree. But Turk's cap, the problem is it's kind of starting to choke out some of my wood ferns. So now,
well, that's what I'm saying, is that it's very aggressive. But try on your Turk's cap, try cutting it back. Don't let it just grow. You know, in about around mid-June, just cut it to about 2 feet tall. And then let it grow the rest of the year, and and you'll be amazed at how great it looks. It looks absolutely fantastic.
I actually cut my frostweed back because we're in a couple areas it gets quite a bit of sun, so it will grow 7 feet tall.
Oh, I've got a frostweed in my yard. I've actually measured it at 12 feet.
Yeah,
it's on a totally shady side of the house, and it grew all the way up until it got to the eave, and then it bloomed, and it comes up every year, you know, or I guess it's spreading because I think it's a biennial, but it's spreading from seed, I guess. But in that area, it comes up, and it goes 12 feet. It's 12 feet tall. It's still up. You know, it's of course dormant or dead, you know, depending on whether it was the first. I guess it was the second year because it was blooming. But it's still standing even in this ice storm and everything. It's amazing how big they get if they don't get the light they want.
Yeah, I trimmed my frostweed twice where it gets real tall. Where it's in total shade, it only gets about 4 feet tall. So that's not a big deal. But the other, I trim it twice. I think it's sometime in late May, and then again sometime around the 1st of August.
Yeah, we actually have frostweed coming up in that Kappa Polyculture. I've decided to remove it because it just doesn't fit in with anything. I've sort of felt bad about it, but it did come in on its own. I had to make a decision. So then again, you know, it's creative management or active management, call it. Do I want that frostweed, you know, whereas the Solidago came in, which is native, and I decided I wanted to keep that because it fits in with everything else going on in there. But the frostweed really, it's so coarse, you know, the big leaves, it really didn't fit in with all like what you're seeing right here, you know. And this is a delicate kind of plant. I've turned off so I can see everybody. So if you want to say goodbye.
Absolutely, it was wonderful. I could look at it.